Everyone, welcome to the Mob Museum. My name is Jeff Schumacher. I'm the Vice President of Exhibits and Programs here. It's great to see a really nice turnout for tonight's event. I think this is going to be a really interesting one, so you won't be disappointed. This is what's so great about Giovanni Rocco, who's our speaker tonight. He has a new book out called Giovanni's Ring, My Life Inside the Real Sopranos. And it tells the story of his 26-year career in law enforcement, much of it spent working undercover in New Jersey and elsewhere, and we'll get into that. What I was going to say is, undercover agents are like the ideal speakers for our museum. They offer observations and insights from like both sides of the law, right? The Mob Museums, we're always committed to telling the story of organized crime, but also the story of law enforcement and how it responds to organized crime. So you can't do much better than an undercover agent who's actually seen both sides firsthand, inside the mob, and then also how law enforcement works to take down the mob. Without any delay, please welcome Giovanni Rocco.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. I want to mention before we start that we'll have opportunity to ask questions. You guys can ask questions afterward. We have a microphone over to the side, and so we'll need to use the microphone as we usually do when you want to ask a question. And we also have copies of Giovanni's book here, which you can buy at the concession stand, and then he will be available afterward to sign them. So I definitely encourage you to do that as well. It's a really great book, as we will talk about here shortly. Giovanni, why don't we start, as these stories often do, at the beginning, and start by talking about you growing up in New Jersey, specifically your experiences with organized crime figures in your neighborhood, and how that shaped your role, your undercover role.
Right. I grew up, like Jeff said, I grew up in New Jersey. I'm a Jersey kid just outside in Hudson County, just outside of Manhattan, Jersey City, Hoboken, and that whole area there. I'm a son of law enforcement. My father was a cop, and I have other first responders in my family. Problem was, I was a black sheep in my family. I didn't like cops. It's not because, it's just the way I was raised. I was a problem child. I was a thorn in my parents' side. I was bad at school. While my brother and sister were A+ students, I was the slacker. Relationship with my father wasn't that well, so because of that, at times I often caused them a lot of heartache, and I purposely went out of my way to defy authority. So much so that I was left back in school for my attitude, and thus my relationship with my father at the time wasn't that well. So, but it wasn't until I don't remember the year. I wrote it in the book because I had to look it up, but it was the year Raiders of the Lost Ark came out, and we were returning from the movies, and here's my dad, and he was working as a detective at the time, and he saw a guy that was on the side of the road hitching for a ride, and it turned out he was wanted for a series of armed robberies. And I watched my dad in our car. He pulled a patrol car over in our family car and jumped in the car with the guy, and I watched him do this and take it down. So that was my inspiration, watching him do that job. I always knew inside of me, I was always a good kid. I was a bad kid, but I wrote that fine line. I always pushed the limit and I pushed the envelope, but I always did good. If you were one of those kids that picked on a kid in the schoolyard, I'm going to challenge you. If you were 6 foot tall and I was 2 feet tall, I'm going to come at you. I always wanted to defend and stand up for the good guy. So good versus evil, I always wanted to be on the good side.
So when you were a kid, though, there were people who were mob guys in your neighborhood. Did you guys all look up to these guys? Did you fear them? How did that work?
I didn't look up to them. My dad was a well-respected cop, so they all knew my father growing up in that neighborhood. They knew he was law enforcement in that area. But I gravitated because my friends were all connected to those guys. That's how I grew up. It was nothing for me to play in a captain or a soldier's backyard growing up, and I knew who everybody was. It was nothing for girls I dated in school. The dad was a hitman and doing time for murder, and stay away from her. Her dad's in, and when he gets out, he's not going to be happy. So I knew that life, and I grew up knowing it. I knew when guys went missing, and then they floated up later. And namely, one of the guys was one of the old school guys, John DiGilio. He was like a young John Gotti at the time, and my dad used his autopsy photo to show me when he floated up, when his own guys clipped him. And just to try to deter me from going down that route of being a bad egg. So I saw these guys. I lived that life. I knew the life, and I identified. I worked in restaurants as a kid. I watched the numbers racket. I learned real fast. And I learned the streets, and I learned about swag and stuff falling off the back of the trucks. So I knew it all, you know. So it was very familiar to me.
It can be very valuable when you went into undercover work. But you started out as a police officer. How did you end up becoming a police officer after this, you know, being the bad kid for a while?
As I wrote in the book, I'm not proud of it, but I bribed my way out of high school. I had to buy a bottle of liquor to pass my history class, and that's how it works in Jersey sometimes. And, you know, I had to go to my mom and come home and say, listen, you know, I have to buy this certain bottle of liquor that's behind the counter because it's expensive, and she had to do it and help me out. And I graduated. I was destined. My family knew I'd wind up bad. I'd wind up dead or in jail by 25 is pretty much what I was told. And I was riding hard. I looked up to my mom's side of the family. There were some outlaw biker type guys that I looked up to them, because they defy authority. And that's the way I figured my life was going to go. I got a job in a phone company. I got lucky. I cut out of school one day. Another kid came to me and said, listen, let's, you know, cut out of school. We'll take half the day and we'll go over to New York. New Jersey Bella's coming in and giving a test. I took the test, and because I was smart and I just didn't give myself enough credit, I came out number 1 on that test. So I had a job waiting for me when I graduated. God was shining down on me, looking back. And I got a job in New Jersey Bell. And here I was climbing poles, doing telephone repairs. And as I write in the book, I would climb a pole in a certain Italian neighborhood, and the guys would come out of the social club and make me come down off the pole. Let me see your orders, thinking they're getting wiretaps, you know. So it was a constant education growing up. So then my dad came to me and said, listen, this department is giving a test. You should try to do it. And I said, you know what? I'm going to give it a shot. And it turned out I came out in the top of the list, and I got the job offered to me. So I became a patrolman. So.
That was in Jersey City, right?
I was in Hudson County.
Hudson
County,
okay.
Yeah, right in that area.
So you're working as a police officer, and how do you evolve into an undercover agent?
I screw up. So what happened was I was about 9 months on a job, and I promised when I got the phone call and had the job offered to me, the chief of police then at the time said to me, listen, you changed your bad ways. I know you since you're knee high, but you know, if you're going to be a troublemaker, I'm not going to give you the job. No, I promise. Give me a shot and I'll make it right. So here I was. I made it through the police academy, and by the skin of my teeth, I'm doing great in the street. And I decided to show up at the precinct on a 77 Harley-Davidson Sportster that was totally street illegal. And I had my uniform pants on, a leather vest, a white T-shirt, and my 9mm, not even in a holster, shoved into my pants. So it didn't go over well. So up one side, down the other, the chief goes, swore he was going to hang me out to dry. 3 weeks later, he called me into his office and asked me, do you still have that motorcycle? And I swore, no, I don't. And he said, listen, I want to give you a shot. DEA is coming in, and they're doing a case, and I think you'd be good for it. I said, okay, what do you want? And he says, we'll buy guns and drugs. And yeah, sure, no problem. And he's like, hold on. And I was like, come on, you know I can do this. And I did it, and I totally screwed that case up. So I did. I totally screwed it up. All the instructions they gave me, I blew the case. And they gave me a chance to go back because I built such good rapport with the guy. And then they gave me a shot to do it, and the DEA was impressed with my work, and then that's how my career started.
Wow, that's amazing. And so you going undercover at the very beginning, this goes back to something we were talking about a minute ago, which is you have to create a persona, right? And you have to. And how did your childhood experiences and your father being a police officer, how did that help you?
Well, again, I look back and I'm blessed that all the events happened. My dad coming home with those pictures of the homicide scenes or autopsy photos or bad things, it calloused me a little bit. It prepared me to be a guy that didn't do acts of violence, but I saw acts of violence. And then when I became a young cop and early on in my career, I had a lot of things happen to me on the job, unfortunate things. You know, I had a lot of people died in my arms. I had a lot of events happen very quickly in the area that I worked. So I saw a lot of death, and I was used to it. So that I could speak to. It's almost like a soldier going to war, coming home. You know, I was hardened to it a little bit. I could turn that on and off when I wanted to. So I used those experiences as a kid and what I saw. And I saw things in my neighborhood and people, you know, beat up and whatnot. And, you know, I used all that in my favor to ingratiate myself with these guys.
So let's get into the operation that is the primary focus of the book. It was called Operation Charlie Horse, right? And it's an infiltration of the DeCavalcante crime family. What was the goal? This was a task force, as I recall.
FBI, yeah, it was an FBI.
FBI and
FBI investigation.
And what was the goal, and what was your role in accomplishing that goal?
So by then I had been with the DEA for a number of years, and then I left, took a little bit of a break for personal reasons, and then I was called up to the FBI and offered a task force position with them to do some work in casework, and then I got into doing undercover work with them. And then I was doing cameos along the way, and then we set it off camera a little bit before. I was deterred. I was deterred that was called into the room when needed for bona fides, and guys would call me up and say, listen, I'm going to do a narcotics deal tomorrow night, I could use you. And I got a call on a Sunday night, and it was a narcotics deal. And we went down to Atlantic City, and my wife was law enforcement also, and she gave me the warning, it's Sunday night. Really? You're going down to Atlantic City? I mean, it's how many hours down, how many hours back you're going to go there, and, yeah, well, I got to help this guy out. And she was like, well, you have the kids tomorrow, because she was also on a job, and she's like, you better be back here by the morning. So when I showed up for this narcotics deal, the guys were late, true to form, right? Like drug dealers do, they're never on time. And I was genuinely mad. And when they showed up, it's just a persona that I was. I never pretended to be something to turn on and off. What you see in front of you here is always the guy I was on the job. And just the way I talked to them, the way I conducted myself that day, it just took a life of its own. There was no intention. My intention was not to infiltrate the Mafia. My intention was just to help a guy out on a narcotics deal. And it just kind of moved step by step into that direction. They understood who I was, spoke the same language, I moved the same way they did, and they bit, And then it just created a life of its own, and before you know it, a couple of months go by, and I'm doing drug deals with these guys, and then you should meet this guy, you should meet this guy. And then a buzz creates, just like in any other business or culture, a buzz was created about me and this guy Giovanni, and then so-and-so wants to meet me, and then before you know it, it's creating a life of its own.
So you're starting to weave your way into this family, and he's sort of talk about the different sort of criminal activities that were going on. What different kinds of things was the family doing? What were you doing? What were some of the figures you were interacting with?
Well, the mob just does what the mob does. I mean, they're into anything they can make money on. They'll make money on a piece of dirt if they could. So, literally, they'll sell dirty dirt or, do what they can. My thing was a lot of swag, a lot of stuff that fell off the back of the truck. Either I sold it or I supplied it to them, and they supplied it to me, and we were helping each other move things along, or it was a drug deal here and there that we did, and then it was slowly but surely I made my way in, whether it was cigarettes or it was maybe counterfeit goods or something like that.
When you say cigarettes, explain what you're talking about.
So the cigarettes are just cases of cigarettes that are untaxed, unstamped cigarettes that, are kind of like hijacked cigarettes, fell off the back of the truck kind of thing, or if somebody had some or I could sell them. There's two versions. There's legitimate cigarettes and counterfeit. There are counterfeit cigarettes out there. And of course, everybody wants to pay more for real cigarettes. So that's kind of how we did things. And once you have cigarettes in the street, it's like gold. Everybody comes to you. And before you knew it, I was asked to bring stuff to the social clubs and drop stuff off.
Just interesting. I know cigarettes are heavily taxed, but so how much cheaper would they be?
Oh, what I sold them for on the street, much cheaper, thousands of dollars cheaper. Wow. Yeah. And again, if you're selling enough of them, they'll come running to you. Yeah. You'll get phone calls. Yeah.
Fascinating. So we're talking about the DeCavalcante family in New Jersey, which is you have the 5 families in New York, and then you kind of have the 6th family, if you will, in New Jersey. Can you kind of talk about how that whole group, those groups interplay, how they interact with each other, and who's in charge, who's not? Yeah,
I mean, you have different we call them Borgatas, and Borgata is a family. So you have the 5 major families, whether it be the Lucchese, the Genovese, the Gambino, the Bonanos. The DeCavalcantes are the longest standing, believe it or not, and a lot of people don't know that. They're the longest standing Italian-American family. They're members, they're original members, and Sam DeCavalcante, who started the family. There's a lot of history there. And they were respected among the 5 families because of their ability and what they were capable and willing to do. They didn't have the strong numbers like the other families did, but John Riggi was the boss of the family, and when he took over the family after Sam and a couple other bosses, he controlled with an iron fist. He had the unions and the ports in that area, and when you have that kind of power, the other families come running. So they made a name for themselves as, they used to call them the farmers because they would farm out contracts. Like the Gambinos relied on them a lot. They would farm out hits, and they would come in and clean them up. They had no problem, you know. If killing was their thing, that's what they had to do. That's what they did. They came in and they were willing to do anything. But along the way, they had slip-ups, and they never really rose to the top, to the cream of the crop.
Well, you have a scene in your book. We don't have to go into detail on it, but the point of it ultimately is that there's a DeCavalcante ranking member who thinks he's the big guy in the room, and then a Gambino guy comes in, and then the whole dynamic changes.
Yeah, that was later on in the case. So after I made my way in through one individual named Luigi, we were doing business together, and so well that he wanted me in his crew. He was going to take me on as his. He was going to not take me into his crew, but stake a claim on me. And once you stake a claim on me, nobody else can take me. And then what happened along the way, Charlie Stango, who wound up ultimately being my captain and my capo, he was in prison at the time and being released for a stint he did on murder charges. And then he came out, and I was doing business with his nephew. So his nephew tried to win me back, and then this whole thing it really started up because Charlie got to know me and hear rumors about me. And when Charlie decided he wanted to meet me and see this kid that he'd been hearing about, and he stuck a claim in me. So he was a captain, and Luigi was an associate at the time. And it ultimately caused a sit-down. I didn't mean it to happen, but it happened, where a sit-down is where you get called into the administration and the bosses sit down. You pitch your case why you should have Giovanni. Luigi pitched his case why he should own me. And ultimately, of course, Charlie won, you know, and that's that. It never sat good with Luigi. It always had a bad taste in his mouth, so it created a lot of infighting between the family and us. So there was times when Luigi thought I came up a lot faster than he did. I was nowhere near. He actually claimed to have gotten his button during the case and got his maid, you know, he's a maid soldier in the family. But he didn't do it the right way, and that caused a lot of infighting between the family. So a particular night, he wasn't liking where I was. He lost the case to claim me. And he called me up one day, and he just said, listen, I need cigarettes, so come to me. And it was an order, like, you know, come to me like that. And I pushed back because I was with Charlie, and I knew I had to wait at Charlie. And I was like, nah, you come to me. I'm not coming to you. And that really left a bad taste. So I said, okay, you know, I just had a feeling in my gut something wasn't right. And you always trust your gut, right? And I knew, I just had a gut feeling he was doing something bad or trying to set me up. And we went back and forth on the phone, and then finally I was in another Gambino spot doing some business with them. And the guy I was with, he actually stepped up and he's like, look, just have the kid come here, have the kid Luigi. If you ask. I didn't tell him why. I said, look, I don't like this kid. He's, you know, we're going back and forth with him. We're having problems with him. He says, don't worry about it, Giovanni. Just tell him to come here. You know, make him come here. No big deal. You know what? That's a good idea. He says, I got guys coming here. I'm going to close up the body shop. You know, I'll keep the business open. Guys are going to come up from down south, and don't worry about it. I got guys who are settling out. Not knowing when Luigi shows up, he turns around with a big attitude and his chest out, and he sees this auto body shop, and he's interested. Well, who's in there? You know, nah, it's the guy Anthony owns this place. You don't know it. All right, who's that? Don't worry about it. This guy Marco Barone, he owns this place. Well, who's that? I think I know that guy. I think I know him. Oh, you think you know him? Come on in. I'll introduce you to him. And then he came in, and next thing you know, he sees these guys in there, and he goes, he knew he was out of his league. And, oh, no, wrong guy. I think it's somebody else. So they went back and forth, and he decided to come clean, and he goes, oh, so you know this guy Giovanni? And in that conversation, he admitted to them, yeah, I was having him come to my social club tonight. And if he didn't answer all the questions I wanted to, my crew was going to bring him downstairs, and we were going to have our way with him, pretty much just chop me up into pieces, as he said later on.
Yeah. It's when you're on the inside like that, and you see things unfolding that could be violent, and you could be like involved in them. I mean, you have to figure out how to get out of them.
Yeah.
A lot of your book is talking about how you get out of these jams, right?
There was a lot of jams I had to get out of. a lot.
So it turns out, you mentioned Charlie Stango, who is your capo, and what we haven't talked about yet is the fact that, Charlie lived in Henderson. Does anybody else live in Henderson here? You was a neighbor of a capo in the DeCavalcante crime family.
But it's a beautiful neighborhood. We never committed crimes there.
But that's really interesting, right? I mean, he was a capo operating, functioning essentially New Jersey, but also Las Vegas. And this is just a few years ago, folks. So can you talk about like the Las Vegas angle on your...
Yeah, Charlie got paroled for murder, and he was down in Florida. And then while he was down in Florida, he kept in touch, and he wanted to make his bones and, get back into the family and go right back to what he knew from 20 years ago or 10 years, however much he served. I don't know how he managed it. He managed to get his parole transferred from the East Coast out to here, which is unheard of. But I guess because he was off the Strip and he was going to be in Henderson. So they gave it to him. And when I met him, I was introduced to him the day he was moving out here. And he had heard about me and heard about Giovanni. I was doing business with his nephew, and he wanted to meet me. And before he met me, he was smart enough to have his Gambino associates look into me and make sure everything I was doing in the street was legit. And I was who they say I was. And I met him, and it was great. Everything went well. And he says, okay, I'm moving to Nevada, and I'll be out there. Maybe I'll call you, maybe I won't. Okay, so it's nice meeting you, Giovanni. Take it easy. And I guess maybe a month had gone by, and then finally his nephew says, my uncle wants you to call him. And he kept his ear to the ground from out here back to the East Coast to see what we were doing, and everything was matching up. And he said, here's a number, give him a call. And that's how it started. Our relationship and what turned into, in the end, wound up being a father and son relationship.
Wow. And I think what the assumption might be, well, he was living here, but he was doing a lot of stuff back in New Jersey, which is true, but he was also working on some stuff here.
He was working on stuff here. So when I eventually came out here to see him, and I became part of his crew, and I started running businesses for him, he shared with me, we're going to open up the Olympic Garden. We're going to buy one of the businesses out here. It's a strip club and a gambling place on the Strip. We were going to buy it, and that's our new business, and we were going to open it up. So he had legitimate business on one side, but he had all these illegal activities going on the other side. So however he can make money, he legitimized it. But so we were going to open this club up out here, and we were going to acquire it, and that was all throughout the case up until the bitter end. So.
And I think if everybody's familiar with Olympic Garden, it's been here for a long time. It's about 1.5 miles from the museum. And the building's still there and has quite a history already. But this we didn't know, right? The mob was going to take over.
Yeah, I was looking forward to it. I was going to be the manager. So.
We'll come back to Las Vegas in a minute. But ultimately, this case needs to come to a conclusion. And so there's the conclusion for you, and then there's the ultimate conclusion for the targets, right? So how did the undercover assignment end for you? And ultimately, it forced you to retire and relocate, right?
Yeah, what happened was out here, we went to dinner one night out here, and there was a lot of infighting in the family, and a lot of things unfolded, too much to get into. But Luigi really dug a hole for himself, literally, where they decided that was it. They were going to put a hit on him. And when they put the hit on him, it was explained to me out here at dinner one night. And the way Charlie had laid it out to me was, they don't want to do anything to him yet because they got to have a problem. And then he knew the infighting with me and Luigi was pretty severe. And we had some issues in the past, touch and go, and really touch and go stuff. And then, I said to him, well, what are they going to do? He says, well, eventually he fessed up to me. We're going to do him. We're going to take him out of the picture. All right. And you're going to do it. Huh. And I'm going to do it. Yeah. And he looked at me and you got a problem with that? What do you say to that? You don't have a problem with that, And Charlie used to say things to me, you be the man you were born to be. Be the man I've taught you to be, Yeah, okay. So I was tasked to do this, and that's when we really quickly realized this case isn't going to go much further. And by that time, I was running Charlie's crew for him, not as a made guy. I didn't get my button or anything like that. But it was explained to me that after we do this deed, the way it fell, the new administration, Charlie was going to take one more step up to the big seat, not the boss's boss, but maybe the underboss. And then he explained to me in his house out here and that I would be up to November. But the case came down in March because we, as FBI agent, we don't kill people. So, it was decided that we were going to take it down.
Well, I was going to say, how does that go? So you were talking to him, and then you got to get home and get on the phone and go to your superiors like, I think we got an issue here.
Yeah, they kind of knew it. Yeah, I'll never forget the night when I had a couple of guys out here with me, and I went right to New York to, and had a meeting with some guys on our team, and I said, I can't believe this just happened. And of course, it was all high fives, and I knew it was a death sentence for me. It could potentially be. Because if they ever decided not to do this, you know, you cut ties with everything. In that world, you get rid of everything that you ever talked about, and I'm the one thing that they can get rid of. So from that point, it's great in an investigator's position, in an FBI position, but for me, living in the street every moment, and at that point in my case, Charlie's son was actually reporting to me and my crew. He had actually put his son under me to report to me. So I had that issue to deal with every day as well. So it was a...
So how does this unfold at this point?
So we planned a murder. He was anxious to commit the murder. We planned it for 4 months. I was able to hold it off to get some really good tapes. We went on some Title IIIs, which are wiretaps, and we recorded everybody's conversations and really looped in the whole administration. And we got some great evidence on it. And we did a RICO case, and everybody was taken down. And the arrest went out. And then after the arrest went out, it was decided that I could not stay because so many things happened during this case with me on a personal level. I was living in their backyard, and they were living in my backyard. I was way too close to home for this. But a lot of people go, well, do you think that's a good idea to have planned it that way? But there was really nobody else who could have did the case. You know?
Were you involved in the arrests?
No, I would never be involved.
How did they? When did the guys understand that you were who you were?
So the day of the arrest, I was out here with the hopes that, you know, be close to Charlie in case the Bureau can flip him. And, you know, there were a lot of other cases we were looking at to some unsolved homicides and stuff. So we would try to flip him on those. And I came out here in that aspect. But back home, when my crew was getting all taken down, even my crew, you know, the arrest teams were feeding me back information. And they actually told the girls, like, call Giovanni, you know, get a hold of Giovanni right away and tell him to run. So they were actually looking out for me the day of the arrest. Tell him to run, tell him to go, you know, get out of town. So they all got taken down, and, you know, Charlie never talked. Charlie went back to prison, where he is now. So he did his bid. He's a gangster's gangster, so that's where he is.
When did they learn that you were responsible for all this?
That day. It's pretty much figured out. Like, you know, you're talking hundreds of tapes, thousands of hours of just, you know, of you talking. There's nothing better in our world. In law enforcement, prosecution is nothing better than a tape. When it's a gangster or a defendant's voice on a tape, you can't beat that. You can't fight your own voice. So everybody kind of knew it, and they kind of gave up quick. Nobody went to trial. Everybody pretty much pled out. Some guys actually at their first appearance, which is sort of unheard of sometimes, was like, look, Your Honor, just let me start my bid right now. You know, can you just put me in right now? And I don't even want bail. I just want to start getting credit.
So how many people ended up going to jail over this?
In the end, there were 10.
10?
10 associates and maid guys in the family were arrested. Could have been significantly more. That kind of, you know, that plays with your emotions a little bit because I went, well, you know, I literally had evidence against hundreds of guys, but my job is not prosecution. I'm a tool. You know, it's not like I set out to take down a mafia. That's not what I intended to do. I had an assignment, and that my assignment was to infiltrate these guys. So it wasn't a personal thing. It was my job to do it. They're the bad guys, I'm the good guys. It's the old, what I did as a kid, cops and robbers, you know. I didn't put these cases on them. They put it on themselves, and they made it happen. It's just that I was the springboard to put them back to jail.
What effect did it have on the Borgata? In other words, how devastating was this?
Oh, it was a serious blow, like everything is. Every time they get arrested, every time there's a significant blow, they go underground. But they'll never go away, you know. They'll never disappear. They're always around. You know, there's always other guys that rise up and want to take into the seats, or, you know, they'll just lay low for a little bit and they'll come back.
Sure. I want to change gears just a little bit because we've talked mostly about the case so far and sort of what the interactions with these mobsters. But there's also the other side, right? There's like your family and like you're an undercover agent, but you're also a father and a husband. How do you manage your relationship with your wife and children in this case? I mean, there's certain incidents we can talk about, but like, how did it work?
I thought I had it worked to science. I figured it out. By this point in my career, I was a well-experienced undercover. I was teaching other undercovers by this point in my life, and I was teaching schools, and I was the guru. I was the Yoda that everybody came to in that program, and when I thought I had it all, I was too blind to my own stupidity. You know, my book is called Giovanni's Ring because of my ring, the pinky ring I used to wear from the government-issued pinky ring that I chose. And I taught myself how that was a switch. When I took it off, I pulled in my driveway at night. When I took that ring off, I put it in a cup holder. And that was to remind myself, I'm not Giovanni Gatto. I'm Giovanni Rocco. I got to go in and be Giovanni Rocco, the father and the husband. And I thought, I have this, I got this. I got it, no problem at all. But then before you know it, I lived out here. I had a place out here and I had a place in New York, but I always wanted to make it home. But here I wasn't making it. In my mind, I thought I was there and I was never there, And then I tried to be there at times, and my wife was taking care of everything. But then a couple of things happened along the way, mishaps, soccer games. We bump into a Gambino guy.
One in particular that's kind of interesting is you're driving on a bridge over Staten Island or to Staten Island, and you get a call.
Yeah, I got a call. So my wife had gotten stuck on a case that she was working and said, look, you got to go, pick up my son. And he was in a daycare in my old neighborhood. And I went and got him, and then here I am cutting through Staten Island, New York, and the Jersey-New York border there. And Jimmy, the guy that originally brought me into this case and started selling stuff to me, by this time I was well situated in the family, and he calls me up. Cousine, are you on the Gatos Bridge? What? I say, are you on the Gatos Bridge right now? No, what are you talking about? And I was on the Gatos Bridge. He says, you on the Gatos Bridge in a black pickup truck? I think you just drove by me. And I'm like, no, what are you talking about? And here I was driving on the Gatos Bridge in bumper-to-bumper New York traffic. But internally, I'm panicking. And, I can't look around and go, where are you? No, what are you talking about? And my heart's going a million beats a minute, and I'm literally starting to sweat. And I go, what are you talking about? And my son is sleeping in the back seat. And he goes, I'm telling you, Cousine, I think you just drove by me. I said, what are you talking? I'm down in Atlantic City with so-and-so. What are you talking about? He goes, I don't know. I'm trying to catch up to this guy. Now I hear he's trying to catch up, so I know he's right behind me. And I'm panicking. So from that point on, and then the other incident where we bumped into soccer, from that point on in the case, I can never go out in public with my real family. And that was a huge burden. It took a toll on my family like you wouldn't believe, because my kids didn't understand. My wife was furious at the fact that, I couldn't even go out to help, or we couldn't go out to eat or do anything. Go to the mall. It was not possible anymore from that point on. So, my family suffered a great deal.
And you lived so close. I mean, could you have lived further away?
If I picked up and moved, yeah. But no, I can't, The worst day was when somebody called me up for a meeting and I had to go. I got called for. And when you get called for by a made guy, you can't say no. And it was a mile from my house, It was where I shopped and where I did everything. And, God forbid, God forbid a friend of mine, if your kid went to school with my kids and I bumped into you. So it was, after that I just laid low. I went underground. So.
And your wife is in law enforcement as well, so she had to have a certain level of understanding, but it probably wore thin at times.
Yeah, you would think she had a good understanding, but her patience wore real thin real fast. Because she warned me early on, what are you doing? This is going to destroy us, and, this is going to be a bad thing for us at the end. She had that intuition, and she was right, but I was so hungry for my job, and I was so dedicated to what I was finally so good at. I was good at doing this work. So it was the little bit of the adrenaline, but when you're really good at something, you could be a woodworker, and if I'm confident in the work that I did, I never said no to a case. I was working multiple cases and helping out.
You're traveling, too. You're going to other places.
Yeah, I was traveling all over the place. And that's not well.
You mentioned the book, it's sort of like an addiction almost.
It is. It's an addiction, because any time I get called to put what we call reps, if I want to get reps in, if somebody needed a hand, sure. It wasn't about the travel. For me, it was about the cases. I could have lived in beautiful high-rises. I could have lived on boats and cars. It wasn't about that for me. I left that all behind. I was more mature in my career later on, because this was much late in my career, where I left all that behind. It wasn't sexy to me. The job was what I wanted to do, my missions that I was given. And she tried to understand. And my wife actually, in the book, she had given a little bit of a quote. And she understood at the end. She shined a lot of light on it, and she understood my relationship with my capo and Charlie. The fact that the toll it really took on me, because here I was, part of a crime family, but my real family was colliding with the crime family. The crime family's true family and their relationships they had were my personal relationships. That's the toll it took on me, because in the end, I sat around angry at myself for burning these kids and burning his wives and these nieces and nephews that I met along the way. The gangsters put themselves in jail, but it was the tremendous heartache that I had to the family members. That's what I felt, a lot of guilt. And she nailed it. You know, if you read in the book, she actually explained, which opened my eyes, and she said, look, you know, what my husband felt was a loss, like you would lose a family or you lost an uncle if it passed away. And Charlie had a love for me, and in a way, I had a love for him. You know, I was always reminded he was a sociopath and a murderer because he'd always remind me of that. You know, but he looked out for me. When I came out here to Vegas, it was always take 2 bottles of water with you. You know, be careful going to the airport. Call me when you land. It wasn't about crime. It was about me and his feelings for me. So how do you not fall? You know, that could lull you to sleep. But when you're doing this the right way, you're always, you know, you got to remind yourself. You know, if he found out it was me, he'd off me in a minute.
I want to just dig it just a little bit deeper on this sort of living this double life. You know, you live close enough, you know, where you lived and where you worked were close enough that you could have interactions at any time with, like, oh, there's my old high school buddy, but now I'm a gangster over here, and he remembers you going into police force, right?
Oh, sure.
I mean, that kind of stuff. Or, you know, or even your own family, extended family. I mean, how did you turn it on and off? And how did you know when to do that?
Well, at this point, I was trained. Early on in my career, I didn't know. Early on in my career, it was a lot of adrenaline, a lot of just struggles with it. But when you're mature in it, it's like any other job. I knew how to control it. But it didn't hit me until later on, like a rush of adrenaline hits you. And you know when you get, you know, God forbid you had to almost get into a car accident, that rush of adrenaline comes in, and then by an hour later, you just feel like you're drained. That was the end of my every day. When I left and went home at the end of the day, I felt literally just drained, everything in me. I was exhausted, ready to fall asleep, and, you know, now I got to go home to my family and eat dinner, and the kids are in bed, and then I promise I'm on my way home. Then I get home, and Charlie would call me, and I'd sit in my driveway for an hour and a half, and then my kids would be at the window waving to me, you know, waiting for me to come in, and I'd brush them, get out of here, go inside. An hour and a half later, I come in, they're in bed, she's mad, you know, rightfully so, and that rush of emotion, now I'm exhausted and drained, and I would come in. You're asking about the old neighborhood. Jimmy Smalls had picked me up one time, and I went to the neighborhood, which is in Elizabeth, and I picked him up there, and start driving. And you don't ask. In that life, you don't ask, where are we going? Give me details, because that can make you look like a rat or a cop, and, you know, you don't want to be either. So start driving. Where are we going? 20 minutes away, just start driving. So he's giving me directions. He led me right back to the neighborhood where I was born and raised. And he wanted to, I was buying drugs from him, MDMA, and he ran inside to get it, and thank God, you know, nobody saw me from the old neighborhood, or, you know, and I you know, you knew everybody growing up. So wow. That was by the skin of my teeth. So.
There are a lot of those moments where it's this close call, right? Yeah. It's amazing you pull it off. So we can't not talk about The Sopranos, which you went ahead is right in the title, right. You know, of the book. So there's widely held theory that the DeCavalcante family is the inspiration for The Sopranos, and there's a fair amount of evidence for that, although the writer insists that's only part of, you know, what he based it on. But were the New Jersey mobsters you got to know anything like The Sopranos?
Well, I call it My Life Inside the Real Sopranos because it's Jersey-based, but every mobster, it's not the mobsters like The Sopranos. Were The Sopranos like the real mob? That's the question. Right. I kind of turn it on, and when somebody asks me that question, no, the question is, were The Sopranos like the real Mafia? And the answer is yeah. I knew guys I could identify. And the real Sopranos is, you know, there's so many close associations to that show where of course, everybody watched The Sopranos. It was a great series. But I was living the life of sitting there doing surveillance on the Ribera Club as a young cop, and now I'm sitting here in these social clubs, going to these clubs and living that life. The day that Charlie went on the record with me with the bosses of the family was at the butcher shop, which is, you know, Satrial's. So here I'm sitting, you know, and I'm looking, and he's going on a record and introducing me, and I'm looking at the boss that I'm being introduced, but I'm looking past him because this side is a deli, and over here, behind him is a bone saw, a fillet knife, a cleaver, And I'm trying to focus on what he's saying to me, and Charlie's vouching for me and the family. And he's with us now, and this is how it's going to be. And this guy's just staring at me, and I can't, So yeah, when I pulled around the corner and I came, it was like pulling onto the set of a Sopranos episode, where everybody stands outside, and the little cafe table is outside the Satriale's and the butcher shop. They had a picnic table outside. So it was so mirrored. It was like, oh my God. And then, unfortunately, Gandolfini had passed away, and James Gandolfini passed away, and I couldn't even decompress when I went home, because when I tried to just sit and watch TV by myself, it was all tributes to that. And who doesn't want to watch that,
Right.
So I would watch it, and then, oh my God, what do I got myself into, And I was always reminded by that series. So yeah, it's very true to form.
And I think what's interesting, and on the one hand, you might still assume, why would guys who are really in the mob care about watching this fake mob show on TV? But they loved The Sopranos, I think.
Oh, I loved it, yeah. When The Sopranos first came out, I was working organized crime cases as a case agent and doing surveillance and stuff. We would surveil the bosses of other crime families and guys that were my subjects. We would surveil them to, Soprano parties. And they would be there with the big Soprano logos, and I would do search warrants at the houses and find all the pictures of them at these Soprano events. And they loved it. They ate it up. And even the decavs were famous for tapes being made. The government made tapes against them saying, verbatim, oh, did you hear this? These guys are us. They're making this whole series about us. So they loved it. They basked in it.
That's amazing. We should note that your undercover work extended beyond New Jersey. You made a reference to it earlier about doing cameos around the country. Can you kind of explain what that is, and then what kind of things you would do?
Yeah, if I had to support somebody else's case and they needed somebody to come in, or if I needed somebody to come in, I did multiple cases internationally on my own, and then cases here in the States across the country. And you'd feed off each other and help each other assist. But a lot of my cases, I've done cases for, whether it be murder for hire or international drug trafficking cases, and a lot of different things. So I've worked across the board.
Yeah, I think you mentioned to me you had 4 different aliases.
Yeah.
How do you, but they were all similar, right? You were someone who was sort of always Giovanni?
They were similar, but yet slightly different. So much so that I angered my wife because we had to put an extra master closet in because I needed more clothes than her. And so it didn't fare well. So we actually altered our bedroom and of course I got the bigger closet because I'm 4 people. So, yeah.
Interestingly, through the museum, we've gotten to know a number of undercover agents over the years. We've had them come here and speak, and have been involved in different things we've done. But it's really kind of this fraternity of agents. A lot of you know each other, you talk to each other about the old days, or learn from each other, right, when you're still working. How did that all work? How did everybody get to know each other and become friends?
Well, reputation is reputation. Your name might come across somebody. Like the founding fathers, Joe Pistone, when I first met him years ago when I had gone through my training, or, Jack Garcia and a lot of guys. You'll just hear different cases, and, when you start to do certain work, you're compared to each other, not in a bad way, but just as paying homage to each other,
Yeah.
And you're recognized. And that was part of the reason why I wrote the book. I wasn't narcissistic where I wanted to tell my story. I just thought it was very important for people to understand the risks that our family makes as law enforcement, the sacrifices unwillingly and unwittingly our families make. My kids didn't know what I was doing. They still to this day don't know. They don't know why they were relocated. They don't understand because they're too small. But yet it's to pay respect and help people understand what's done. I'm not the first and I'm not the last to do this job. And we have men and women out there internationally doing things that just keep us safe every day, and they don't get acknowledged for it. We don't. Case agents get the credit. The undercovers don't. We just go work another case. So I wanted to tell the story because I'm one of many.
Yeah.
One of the things that's interesting, if some of you know, on the first floor we have an artifact case with many of the objects that Jack Garcia used, the tape recorders and things that he used in his day to record conversations and so forth. And I've got to believe you had more sophisticated equipment than he had to deal with.
I did, and I was fortunate enough to have it, but I also had the archaic equipment when I started.
Ah, okay.
Which you have in the museum, which, I came here and toured. I told you I was here about a month ago, and I finally, was able to come here on my own and tour it. And I looked and I was like, oh, I remember wearing one of those big things. And they were so archaic. I mean, you might as well just take this bottle and stick it in the back of your pants and hope that nobody sees it.
It's amazing. So you retired fairly recently, and so I think what's interesting about that is if you talk to Joe Pistone, he remembers working undercover in the 70s and early 80s, right? So that seems like a long time ago. Jack Garcia was the 80s and 90s. I mean, we're talking just a couple years ago now. What does a traditional mob look like today in New York and New Jersey? It's still active, still doing stuff?
They are reduced in numbers, but the same activity, and what they were doing when Joe was there, what they were doing with Jack, and what they were doing with me is all the same. Nothing changes. What's the old thing? A leopard doesn't change its spots. If it works, you just get past the little things. Technology kind of puts a little strain on them. 9/11, when that happened, they kind of went underground a little bit. But when those events happen, that's a good opportunity for these guys to restructure and regroup. Arrests come down and big sweeps are made. And it's a yin and a yang. The government wins some, and then the good guys win, and then the bad guys win. It's cyclical. Right now they're at a lull, and they'll be up in numbers before you know it, and they'll be back to their old. They have not missed a beat.
Yeah.
It's just you might not see them out there every day like the John Gottis and the flamboyancy of it.
Well, one imagines they've learned something from the John Gotti situation.
A lot.
Let's not walk down the street and give press conferences, right?
But I will say I saw a good meme lately where John Gotti on a walk and talk had a COVID mask on.
That could be useful.
And it would be great. Instead of holding your hand up here, it would be awesome.
Well, great. Why don't we open it up for questions from the audience? Hope you guys have thought about some questions. We covered a lot of ground here, but I bet you have some other thoughts. If you do, please come on up to the microphone, and we'll take turns asking questions. And while you're coming up, hopefully, here comes a fella. I also have some questions from people watching online. I want to ask at least one of those as well.
How you doing?
Good, how are you?
As I was listening, I definitely started thinking about Joe Pistone and all that. In your situation, any of the people who vouched for you, did they suffer the same kind of end that some of the folks with, where they got clipped or whatever? And then secondly, these days, do you have risk in your life in terms of somebody coming after you?
Right. I never had a vouch. I kind of made my way in, so there was nobody that was in jeopardy of getting clipped for bringing me in. Nobody was going to get, serve the ultimate penalty for bringing me in. I kind of made my own way in, and things just unfolded that way. So I think they can look at each other, and there's no finger pointing that can happen to say one particular thing, because money is everything. It drives the train. So they were all hungry for money, so they were all to blame. They all have the same responsibility. So there's no vouch for me or anybody that brought me in or that can be clipped for it. And my safety today is, I'm sitting here. This is my first outing with the sunglasses on because I have to take steps, and I'm just slowly coming out of the shadows to tell the story. So, whether they want to come at me or I did my job. I'm not a member that flipped traditionally internally. I'm a police officer that did my job. I'm law enforcement. It's my job to catch them. It's their job to get away. And I think most of the guys, serious guys, would look back and say, "Yeah, listen, that's the way it is. You win some, you lose some. Good on you." And I think a lot of the guys nowadays that share that story is, "Yeah, you got over on us. You won this one." I would hope they look at it that way.
But it's something where I gotta believe you. Maybe we all do this today. I don't know, but you're never gonna sit with your back to the door, that kind of thing.
I never did.
Right.
But the Giovanni Gatto in me, I'm not afraid to sit with my back to the door. I'm always vigilant. I'm always aware of my surroundings. I always have been.
Yeah.
So,
Cool. So we have another question. Come on up.
Hey.
Good afternoon. Sorry. I was wondering, there's like a term that Florida's like a neutral state for mobsters and crime scenes and stuff like that. Is that a true valid, since you were in and out, is that true? And what's the reason for it?
For Florida?
Yeah, like Florida's like a neutral state. It's
Open
like,
city, open state.
right.
No, Florida for gangsters is just a place where it's beautiful weather, and a lot of guys like to retire down there like everybody else. They're no different than us so they don't have any protection or any kind of reason why they go there. It seems like a place where they all go to flock. They came out this way to make money, and some would come out here and retire, but most of them just retire down to Florida just because it's beautiful weather and that's where they want to be. But as far as being a neutral state, I've never heard anything like that.
Did you actually mess up the case when you first started so you could get the confidence of the mob? Like, oh, he messed it up on purpose.
No, I was always cautious. I didn't mess up, but there were missteps. Sometimes on my part of laziness or just kind of, I didn't think it through. In one part I did describe in the book where I was very comfortable by then. I had an office where my crew reported to me every day, and they knew I'd be at the place every day and you could come see me. Almost like a scene in The Sopranos.
Wouldn't that go like towards your benefit, and that was used in the Bureau for your benefit?
Yeah, they loved it. They used to love and come and touch base with me. And then one night I had pulled in long before I got into my place, my office, and where they were going to all come see me. And I pulled into a gas station. And the purpose was to turn my equipment on. And as I was doing it, I didn't realize Charlie's son, my capo's son, was behind me for miles on the highway. And he had a couple of girls in the car with him and thought it would be funny if he scared his cousin. And he told the girls. So as I was trying to get all my equipment ready, and he pulled up and ran up alongside my car and ripped the passenger door open and just screamed, "Give me all your money." Turned his hat around backwards. And if he would have walked up to the car, he would have saw a whole different scene. So, I let my guard down a little bit there. And after little things like that happen, which is a big thing, because if he would have walked up to the car, he would have seen something completely different. And when he pulled up to the car, I had my devices in my hand, and I was activating them. And I took them and I shoved them under my seat. And as I did that, he screamed, "Whoa, whoa, 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 cuz, it's me, don't shoot." He thought I was reaching for a gun. So, I was blessed. And again, God was showing down on me that day because as I was reaching, please, please, please don't. So by that time, we were up on a wiretap on Charlie's phones and everybody's phones. And we actually caught the conversation the next day on the wire. And he says, "Oh, Daddy, did Giovanni tell you what happened yesterday? He almost shot me." And again, they reminded me. He's, "You know what? You idiot, you should have shot you."
Is the
We
mob,
have
like,
a
more
number of
more
questions.
Okay.
contained?
I'm sorry?
Are they more contained since there's like less cash flow, more debit card, and more traceable instead of lace?
Nah, whatever works. Cash is king. Cash is great, but they'll find a way to make money with anything. Even today, they'll figure it out with Bitcoin and everything going on.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
So we have, sir, hold on a second, because we got 3 people behind you there. That's
all right.
fine.
We'll get there, though.
You're coming up.
Hello. So
Hi.
first, I wanted to thank you for coming out today, sharing your story. And my question is, what are your plans now that you're retired? What are your plans?
Now that I retired, try to get my family where it needs to be is priority number one. Be there as much as I can. And I have now dedicated myself to mental health and behavioral health for law enforcement and first responders. So I'm trying to get involved in that and using everything that happened to me for good to be there to develop programs for them. So that's what I've been focused on.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank you for your service, and I have a question. How do you think we can catch the Taliban generals and the drug cartel generals, and can the military help us?
The military always helps us. Just put me back to work. I do miss it because of the cases. Just keep doing what we're doing. We're doing a great job. And there's men and women out there every day that are fighting for us. And we're doing a really good job. That's all I can tell you.
Because I'm a little concerned about the drug cartels in Mexico.
Yeah.
There's shootings all the time, and there's cities they've taken over. And do you have any suggestions or solutions? Or
Eventually it'll come to a head. The Mexican cartels are some of the most vicious people I dealt with when I did business with them. But we're doing the right things. Again, we're trying to fight it as best we can. And it's just use the RICO cases against them, use the RICO acts as we've been doing. The same charges we do against the organized crime, just treat them as domestic terrorist if you have to,
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Rocco, I also want to thank you for your service. My question is this. What exactly were the defendants in this case charged with? Was it RICO, money laundering, interstate travel, native racketeering, what?
All the above. Yeah. A couple of drug charges thrown in. RICO is a big charge, conspiracy for murder, a lot of drug charges, and acts of violence and stuff like that along the way. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
One thing, we should have probably touched on this earlier, but there's this sort of this notion that still lingers out there that the traditional mob doesn't get involved in drugs, but that's actually not true.
Nah, it's not true at all. Yeah. Any way they can make money.
Hey,
Right.
Giovanni, thank you for being here. Thank you for your story. It's fascinating. A couple of things I wanted to ask you was, with all the stress and everything going on in your life and everything going on with all this stuff, what kind of coping mechanisms did you use? I know a lot of guys in your business get involved in alcohol and drugs and stuff like that. Did you ever have any issues with that?
I did not have issues with substance. Woodworking was my thing. I went out in the garage and I tinkered. You wouldn't think it, right?
Oh, wow.
I surf, believe it or not. The ocean is my therapy, so I would try to spend as much time with toes in the sand whenever I could. That was my therapy. And again, we had to do psychological tests every 6 months to operate. So, they kind of took our temperature and made sure we were on track. So we didn't fall into that.
Okay, well, good. The other thing I was going to ask you too is, with the evolution of RICO in the 80s and stuff, do you find it's effective today as it was back then?
It is.
It is?
So much so that I had dinner with my crew one night, and I tell the story in the book where my crew was actually sitting there with me at dinner, and they were talking about RICO, warning each other, we got to watch out for this RICO. And of course, I knew what they were talking about, but I can't divulge. Hey, yeah, you're right. I was like, and so I flipped it. What's going on here? Who's this guy RICO? And why was my whole crew afraid of one guy? What are we doing here? This is what I got? And they bit. No. But they paused, and it was Charlie's son who said to me, no, Cousine, RICO's a thing. What? And I played stupid. No, RICO, like the charge. And they actually on tape explained, no, listen, the whole thing, what we're doing here, what we're doing with the papaya, the drugs, what we're doing with drugs and this and the cigarettes and the booze, everything gets kicked up to you and you kick up to daddy. That's all a RICO charge. Oh, okay.
And they're really afraid of RICO? Was
Yeah.
that what a big, okay.
Yeah, they know it better than the law does.
All right.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Sir, did you have a question? Go on now.
I was going to ask you, do you know Frank Collada? Who
I
he
know.
is?
Yep, I'm aware.
In January, every year they have Mob Month at the library.
Right.
And we were there a couple of years ago, and it was right after Tony Spilotro was killed. And we were sitting there, and Frank was selling his book that he had there. And we were all sitting around. We had mutual friends, so we were all talking. And he looks over, and he looks over at this blonde, and he's looking, and she kind of waves to me. And he says, do you know Nancy? I said, well, yeah, that's my wife. And he says, you married Nancy Spilotro? Well, I don't know if you see, if there's a picture that's in the paper and her, the spitting image, you cannot tell them apart. They grew up together. Him and Tony all went to school together. He actually had to walk over and stand 2 feet in front of her to tell it was the difference.
Oh, no way.
Yeah. But the way he said it was, says, you married Nancy Spilotro? I was just a little anecdote, but I thought, how people get mixed up.
Yeah.
And,
Mistaken identity, right? And what can happen?
yeah,
Something
that
breaks
was a
bad.
great thing they used to have at the library.
Yeah,
Then
it's-
Oscar Goodman talked, and there were some really good people there.
Great story. Thank
But
you.
everybody looks like somebody else.
Oh, yeah. We all look like somebody.
Yeah, but to this day, people still get them mixed up,
I don't know, I dyed my hair.
Well, we do have, I think, there's one question, and this is just a quick one.